active recall with spaced repetition. Now in 5 years and 10 years time, everyone's going to be doing this, which means everyone will be much smarter and exam difficulty will increase dramatically. But since at the moment not everyone is doing it, it's super important for you guys to learn it now and have the advantage over the next 5 years. G'day everyone, it's Sil here, and in this video we are talking about all things studying. This video will be a conglomerate of all the advice that I have used, all the hours that I have spent on Ali Abdaal's YouTube channel, and basically all the tips and tricks that have worked for me throughout university to get really good marks without working too hard, I hope. And the beautiful thing about all this is that studying boils down to 3 major steps, okay? It's structuring, understanding, then retaining. I'm going to talk about all that, and I'm going to teach it to our special guest this week. Oh, sounds like our guest is here. So before I go say hi, just introducing myself. I'm Sil, I'm a final year medical student. I'm starting as a doctor next January. I try and make videos that are useful for medical students or people interested in healthcare degrees. So if you enjoy this kind of content, consider subscribing. And please, it really helps me out if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, if you want. All right, let's go say hi. Albie, hey, how you going? Come in. So Albie, I was stoked to hear that you got into university next year, and it was a really good question you asked to talk about today, which is some studying tips and tricks and a bit of a masterclass on how to structure it all, because it's a bit of a mess. If it's okay with you, I'll make a little video on YouTube and we can cover it all, okay? So studying is one of those things where working smart is much better than working hard. And when you invest in understanding how you understand, in learning how you learn, it will pay dividends in the future. It links well to that 7th habit of highly effective medical students, which is the video I'll just put a link to in this video and in the description, where the 7th habit is essentially sharpening your saw, which links to the story of someone who's trying to saw down a tree, but he's using a blunt saw and it takes him 6 hours. But if he had just spent 1 hour sharpening the saw, it would have taken him 2 hours, which would have halved the amount of time he spent on the whole process. So investing now, spending a bit of time and understanding how to study will pay dividends in the future. But before we talk about what you should do, let's just identify a couple things that you really shouldn't do and probably are doing. The big no-nos in studying is rereading and highlighting. And we all do it because it's easy, it's kind of cathartic, and it feels really productive. If you've read a chapter 3 times, you feel like you really understood it. If you've highlighted with 5 different colors, different things, and you're structuring it in your mind per color, and yellow is what you'd understand, pink is not what you really understand. You think you're doing really good work, but really the evidence is pretty clear that compared to other techniques, it's pretty rubbish. So you should be spending your time on more effective and efficient methods, and that's what this video is all about. So say goodbye to rereading textbook chapters and highlighting stuff. Let's talk a bit about studying. The first part of studying is structuring your knowledge. If I asked you what's 1 + 1, you would tell me it's 2. And if I asked you how you knew that, you could probably explain to me the concept of a number and addition and how it all works out. But if I asked you not how you understand it, but where did you understand it, you'd probably be a bit confused because you don't think about things in terms of where you store your knowledge, because your brain is just this big black bucket and, facts just come out of it. But if you form a structure, it actually improves your retention exponentially, or at least significantly. And I say this because it's the fundamental concepts in mind mapping and memory palaces, and all the memory champions who memorize decks of cards use location and mind maps and mental palaces to store information. Now, you don't need to do all of that. I spent a year trying to study medicine through mind palaces, and it didn't end up really paying dividends for me. But what you do want to do is understand the outline of a course that you're taking, okay? Understand the trunk of the tree and the different branches. So if you're studying neurology as the trunk of the tree, then you need to understand that there's a central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, there's the spinal cord and the brain. In the brain, there's anatomy, pathology, physiology, and in pathology, you can have cancers and it branches out, right? So when I'm taught a new fact about an astrocytoma, I can place it in the tree. I know where it fits in the grand picture. There's a good video by Sebastian Perry on his most recent vlog where he talks about how he scopes a new course. And I highly recommend you guys watch it, because using Notion that he uses, or just drawing it out on a piece of paper, understanding the schema of where information will be fitted into will be super important in your understanding and in learning more content quickly. So make sure you scope out your courses at the start of the semester. Now, Keep it broad, guys. You do not need fine detailed brush strokes. You just want to get the broad brush strokes to understand roughly where things are going to fit when you're starting off. I always used paper for this, but I'm going to start using Notion, which is a super powerful app, basically going to replace all the productivity apps over the next couple of years, I'm pretty sure. So learn how to use Notion as well. It's pretty helpful. That's all clear, Albie? Cool, let's keep going. Okay, so we've just covered structuring. So now when you learn new information, you roughly know where to place it in your tree of knowledge or in your schema of the course outline. Now we're going to talk about understanding, and I want you to say this with me. Understanding does not equal memorizing, okay? In order to understand things, you need to actively reflect whilst learning it. Does this make sense to me? So in this regard, it's really good to have pre-recorded lectures where you can pause so that you can actively pause the lecture and then say, okay, does this make sense? Is this consistent with my understanding of reality? Does it flow on from my first principle understanding of the subject? The second thing you can ask yourself is, could I explain this to a 5-year-old? And when you can explain things simply, right, to a 5-year-old, it proves that you understand the concept's most important aspects. Okay, and when you understand the most important aspects, you generally have a pretty good understanding of the topic, which will make the next step, which is retaining information and recalling it, much easier. So whilst you're encoding new information, always ask yourself, does it make sense and could I explain it to a 5-year-old? I highly recommend that after you finish a topic that you actually practice this. Now, I don't have that many 5-year-olds around, but what you can use is an audio recorder on your phone. And you just basically talk to your phone like it's a 5-year-old and you record it, and you have to say it out loud. You can't do it in your head, because when you think about a subject, actively reflecting on it, just thinking it, you will cheat. When there's a hole in your knowledge, you will dodge it. But when you speak out loud, it forces you to explain your knowledge in a linear and therefore logical sense. And if there's a hole in your knowledge, you can't dodge it because you're saying it out loud. So you'll be able to tell that you're making no sense. I often call these brain dumps, where essentially at the end of learning a new topic or subject, I'll take out the audio recorder on my phone and I'll just verbalize everything I understand about that topic. And if I can explain it broadly, then that shows to myself that I kind of understand it. Okay guys, we've talked about how we structure our kind of knowledge trees and scoping our subjects out, understanding broadly where things fit. Then we've talked about understanding concepts when you're learning them for the first time by asking yourself those questions. Now we're talking about the most important part, which is the retaining of information. Who cares if you actually understand something if in the exam you can't remember it? But it all comes down to the two techniques which just have the best evidence base, and I feel like everyone will fall back on them, and that is active recall with spaced repetition. Now in 5 years and 10 years time, everyone's going to be doing this, which means everyone will be much smarter and exam difficulty will increase dramatically. But since at the moment not everyone is doing it, it's super important for you guys to learn it now and have the advantage over the next 5 years. So what is active recall? It is essentially the opposite of passive rereading of information. Active recall is basically answering questions, okay? You actively need to draw out information to answer a question. And when you give people a list of words to memorize and one of them just reads the list and the other one reads it, then tries to answer and recall it, and then does that a couple of times, when you compare the two people doing the exact same task with different methods, the people with active recall smash the people who just passively read the text. Evidence is super clear. Active recall is the best. Now, how can you do active recall? Well, the best resource is doing practice exams. So hopefully in your course you're doing, there have been previous students who have compiled questions that you can practice on, or previous exams. Maybe your lecturers have given you some practice exams. Do them. Okay, that's the most important resource. And if you do them early in your course, you actually have a pretty good understanding of the depth of knowledge that you need whilst you learn throughout the course. So practice questions are the most important, Albie, okay? A useful way to do active recall whilst you're in a lecture or learning new content is to take notes as questions. Don't just write that, mitochondria is the organelle responsible for producing the most ATP in the cell. Write the question, what's the, powerhouse organelle of a cell and how does it work? And then you have to remember that it's mitochondria, and how does it work? The electron transport chain. You have to draw it all out and show the amount of ATP and what oxygen is doing and yada, yada, yada. It causes you to actively recall. So look, the more energy it takes you to remember something, the more strengthened that connection in your mind is, and therefore more likely that you're going to remember it. I have a theory, right? So you can kind of tell how effective your study session is by your body position. So if you're like this and you're just scrolling and passively rereading a passage, obviously that's not a very high yield study session. But if you have to go bloody super sane and like you're studying and actively recalling as much information as you can, like, mitochondria, electron transport chain, gotcha. Sorry if I look like I'm taking a poo. But the point is, it requires a lot of energy, so your body position has to change. So studying is an active and energetic process. So if you find yourself slouching while studying, you're probably not doing the right method. Anyway, that's just a random theory. Okay, so I hope that makes active recall clear. It's essentially just doing questions and actively recalling information. So getting practice papers, doing practice questions, doing brain dumps. Now, the power of active recall comes with spaced repetition. Okay, spaced repetition is the death of the Ebbinghaus forgetfulness curve, or something like that. It's essentially the curve that shows how you have an exponential loss in knowledge over time. But if you revisit that knowledge at intervals, then you will remember it for longer. Now, I never had a really strict calendar for revisiting information that I was learning. I just kind of followed the rule that like I'd learn it in a day, and then I'd revisit it in a week, and then I'd revisit it in a month, and then I'd revisit everything just before the exam. And that worked well enough for me. But if you want to be super structured, you can do that. You can use Google Sheets. I'll link to some videos from Ali Abdaal, he'll describe how he uses Google Sheets to structure his spaced repetition studying. But do what works for you. I think the final closing point to make here, guys, is study a bit every day, okay? Even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's half an hour, just do a bit every day. Don't cram. That doesn't help anyone. It probably will just stress you out. But just study daily. And the second important closing point to make is how important sleep is, okay? The science is super clear on sleep, guys. We don't know why we do it, but if you don't get sleep, you're dumber. Everything is worse. Your health is worse. Your brain is worse. Everything sucks. So you need to sleep enough. Make sure you take care of your sleep. Make it a priority. Students don't sleep enough because they're always doing all-nighters and binging and whatever, but try your best to value sleep and it will make you remember more. If you have any questions, read the book, Why We Sleep. It's a super good book. And now I'm very pro-sleep. All right, thanks for staying to the end, guys. I hope you found that useful. In summary, there's 3 parts to studying, okay? There's structuring the course, the overview, the broad brushes, understanding where the information you'll receive fits in the course. Then there's the understanding, stopping and asking yourself, does this make sense to me? And then practicing explaining that to your phone, but explaining it simply in simple terms to show yourself that you understand something. And if you don't, then go back to the source content and learn it again. And the final thing is retaining, which is where you do active recall with spaced repetition. So you're asking yourself questions, you're answering questions actively, and you're doing that at different intervals, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. And that will reinforce information for the exams, which you will now get an HD on, guaranteed. Unless you didn't like the video, in which case you might just get a credit. But maybe hit the like button and then you can get your HD, I don't know. But until the next video, have an absolutely lovely day. Bye for now.